Great. Hi, good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to the first session of the Spring 2026 semester of SunoikisisDC Digital Classics. This semester is on the topic of digital approaches to cultural heritage. There will be a second summer semester, which we'll hear a little bit more about later in this hour that Monica and others are running. The session today is going to be a general introduction to the semester and to the program and to the concept of digital classics and digital cultural heritage, or digital approaches to cultural heritage, I should say. And there's several people who you can see on the screen now who I will introduce in a minute and who are going to talk about various topics in this session. I'll start, if I may. Hi, I'm Gabby. I'll start, if I may, with a brief introduction to the semester as a whole. Let me just quickly check if I can put my screen up. Yes, that's not what I wanted to show. However, this is what I wanted to show. Yes, so this is the program. If you're following this session from having found it on YouTube, either today, the 15th of January, or any time in the future, then in the description of the video, beneath the video, there is a link back to the session page for this session, which is this page, which has the outline, some readings, resources, and exercise, but also has the program of the semester as a whole. So just to give a quick overview of this semester, because we're focusing mostly on digital approaches to cultural heritage this semester, in alternate years we have a program that is primarily focused on digital classics, which is language, literature, history, linguistics, and various other technologies. But in this year, in the even numbered years, we tend to focus on slightly less text-based parts of classics and cultural heritage. And so we will have several sessions related to geographical data and geographical approaches to the ancient world, to 3D modeling, imaging, and so forth. We'll look at epigraphy, we'll look at some ethical issues and issues of working with other kinds of heritage, including indigenous heritage, and so forth. And this TBA at the bottom will probably be a session on virtual worlds, but it's not been confirmed yet. So that's the sort of overview. As you can see from this, there are many different people involved. The SunoikisIS program, which Monica's going to talk about in a few minutes, is a massive collaborative program. We all take part in this in various different ways, and many different people use this. Some of the people watching this video live are probably some of my students. So hi to you. Please feel free to use the live chat to just introduce yourselves. Also, if you're not my students, please do say hi in the live chat now. You can also use the live chat to ask questions or leave comments, either throughout the program and the session, and we will look at them a bit later, or at the end we're going to have time for some discussion and questions, and I hope you'll all stick around to take part in that as well, again through comments in the live chat. So this program is both an introduction to the program, of which this session is the first session, but this program is also part of. It's an example of the sort of thing we're looking at and talking about in this session. So we're looking at the question of what is digital cultural heritage, and there are various ways to answer the question of what is digital classics, what is digital cultural heritage. If you go looking on the web for answers to that question, you will find things like this program, so this is an introduction to digital approaches to cultural heritage. Fantastic. Looking at those 9 sessions should tell me what digital cultural heritage means, and you will get a particular list of information on that list. there will be things that will be missing from that list. You might say, oh, well, why do Gabriel, Bodard and Chiara Palladino think that the only thing that exists in digital cultural heritage are those 9 topics? What about this topic, which is really important to me and I know a lot about, and is also digital cultural heritage, right? So every such list is going to be complete. Why are they incomplete? What are the selection criteria and the biases that have led to the lists turning out as they are? That's the question we're asking basically for the whole of the next hour, and everybody here is going to be sort of contributing an example of that question for us to think about and talk about as well. I think that's probably all I need to be looking at a screen to show. So I'll come back to this view quickly. So I want to just make three quick points before I sort of introduce the session as a whole and hand over to my colleagues. The first of those is part of asking the question of what is digital classics, of which digital cultural heritage is a partial synonym, a partial subset perhaps, or partial superset even as well. So one of the ways to answer that question is by starting with a definition of digital humanities. And you may be aware, or if you're not, I will give you this caveat to start with. If you ask 5 digital humanists what is digital humanities, you will receive 8 different definitions, right? So, but I don't want to get into the sort of question of the sort of more controversial parts of this definition. But I think a fairly uncontroversial answer to that question is that digital humanities is the critical application of digital and computational methods, not only technologies, but methods and approaches to the traditional study of the humanities, so history, literature, arts, thought, and so forth, cultural heritage. And it is the application of traditional humanities methods like close reading, literary analysis, linguistics, and so forth, to the study of digital phenomena such as social media and the web and so forth. So between those things, you've got the scope of digital humanities, and the reason that one can say that not everybody doing history, literature, archaeology, etc., is automatically doing digital humanities nowadays, because after all, our computers ubiquitous, is that most of us, most of what we do in our humanities study, yes, we use computational tools of various kinds, but they're not the object of our study, right? So when we write a paper, and we've used digital tools to help us control and manage our information and so forth, we don't write a lot about the computational side of it while we're writing that paper. We mostly write the paper about history, and we might footnote at best some of the digital tools that have helped us with that. If you're a digital humanist, you probably do write possibly entire papers, books on the digital tools and how they change the way you're doing your historical work. Okay, so that's I think the main difference. I might invite my 4 colleagues to note if they've got any sort of nuance or tweaks to that definition. But I mean, it's a very inclusive definition, right? I think it doesn't leave a lot. There's a lot of things that could fit in there. So the second part of this question then is, having said that, what is digital classics? It's exactly that, but when in my definition of digital humanities, I talked about all aspects of the humanities, the dozen or more disciplines which you might normally find in a humanities faculty, and several social science disciplines. With digital classics, it applies specifically to the ancient world, right? To what we study in classics departments, in classics programs. the study of the ancient world, the study of potentially, the post-ancient medieval world in some contexts. And I would argue, and not everybody agrees with this for various different reasons, but that the study of antiquity has to include global antiquity, because it would be pointless to say I'm studying Greece and Rome, but not Asia Minor, but not the Middle East, not where they start speaking a different language, not Egypt, not the Celtic world, not the Germanic world, not North Africa. And so we all agree that it would be silly to draw the border there, but isn't it equally silly to draw the boundary between the Middle East and India, or between India and China, or between Eurasian antiquity and pre-contact American antiquity, right? I mean, when the sorts of methods we're talking about, they apply to the ancient world, which in many ways, in some contexts at least, means the pre-modern world, because ancient means different things in terms of the BCE CE dates, where antiquity ends depends a lot on where you are in the world. So if you're ancient in that very broad sense, in your interests and your materials, and you're being self-consciously and critically digital about it, then that's my definition of digital classics. So again, that hopefully is relatively uncontroversial, apart from the classics doesn't only mean the ancient Mediterranean part, which I know is going to be things that some people disagree on. And the third thing I wanted to say, the last thing I wanted to say in that sort of introductory part, is just a sort of a caveat that we're talking from an academic context. This is university roughly master's level pedagogical materials that we're producing in this conversation. All of the people on the screen now either work in or teach at university institutions at various parts of the world, but a lot of the activity and the study of and the research into, and in particular the digital study of and research into cultural heritage in particular, takes place outside of university environments, outside of school and academic environments, in other sort of parts of the heritage sector, in particular in galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. And people who work in those areas may have at times different agendas, different needs, and different sorts of things they're producing. So while obviously a lot of people who work in museums, for example, do a lot of academic research and write papers and books and produce new knowledge, a lot of people, actually their day job is to conserve materials, to study materials, to make their materials available to the general public, to communicate that material to people, to organize that material, rather than to write books which contain new knowledge, right? So the kinds of digital tools you need to think about conservation, to think about communication, public engagement, knowledge exchange, and so forth, may at times be different from what we as academics are thinking about and using. So I think in this semester we will try to cover those things as well, to some degree. We have got several museum curators speaking over the course of this semester as well, although none of them are in the room here, which was an oversight on our part. So that's. Does anyone want to come back on anything I've just said there? Okay, then. Okay, let's get on with the rest of the session then. For the rest of this session, then we're going to have a brief history of digital classics over the last, maybe not 100 years, but over 50 years. That Darcy Krasne is going to give. I'll ask you all to also just introduce yourself briefly, along with your job titles and institutions and so forth, so I don't have to have remembered all of those things at the beginning of your presentation. We will then have an even briefer answer to the question: what questions are we asking when we're doing computational linguistics related to ancient text, by Polina Yordanova Nanif, Polly, as I can't. Yeah, find it hard not to say even professional context. We're then going to have an introduction to the Synoikis program as a whole. This is the program within which we are. I've talked about this semester, but there have been probably 20 or more individual semesters in this program in the past. And so Monica's going to tell us a little bit about this. I'll try not to make the Godfather joke I always make when introducing Monica. Monica, you can introduce yourself instead using whatever cultural references you choose. And finally, Chiara, who's the co-organizer of this semester, is going to give a brief introduction to another of these lists that you might look at if you wanted to figure out what digital classics was, which is the Digital Classics Wiki. And we'll come back and I'll talk a little bit about the exercise to sort of wrap up, and then we can have lots of time for discussion. So please, those of you watching live, please do ask questions then. Those of you not watching live obviously can't ask questions, or at least you could, but we wouldn't see them. But I guess if you do have pressing questions, we'd love for you to get in touch. But you'll have to do so via a different mechanism. So anyway, I'll hand over to Darcy next, I think.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Great. All right. So my name is, as Gabby said, Darcy Krasne. I'm a lecturer at Barnard College, which is affiliated with Columbia University. So that's why there's always a confusion about where I am. So I on the scholarly side of things, I work primarily on Latin poetry, but I also obviously work on digital classics. So, and sometimes the interconnection of the two. So today I am, as Gabby said, going to give you a short history of digital classics from its approximate, generally recognized beginnings, which are somewhat ill-defined, through 2004, and you'll see why 2004 is my endpoint. So let's see, can everybody see my slides? Gabby, you can make them full screen whenever appropriate. Yes. All right. So as I said, I'm going to give you an overview of the early history of digital classics and highlight some of the major projects and major figures that have impacted the field. Most of these projects were very foundational for anything that's been done since, so you're likely to encounter mention of these projects and people as you're exploring the field over the next couple of months. But I also want to start off by quickly touching on two very fundamental questions, both of which Gabby has already addressed. What do I mean when I say classics, and what do I mean when I talk about digital humanities? So when I say classics, I mean in part the study of Latin and ancient Greek, but I also mean the cultures that used those languages. And I also mean the cultures that interacted with those cultures. If I say the ancient Mediterranean and Near East and most of Europe and parts of Northern Africa, that's too much of a mouthful, so I tend to just stick with classics, even though we all know at this point that there are problems with the term and that it also can and should be much more broadly applied. So, but that's, so I'm very much using classics as a very specific shorthand. So because we study the cultures as well as the languages, everything from clothing styles to economics to architecture falls under that heading of classics, so long as it's from ancient Greece, ancient Rome, or any of the cultures colonized by those two empires. And of course, the field of classics also now includes the study of the later reception of these cultures, which is an extremely flexible concept and looks at both good and bad uses of Greco-Roman antiquity across time and throughout the world. So this is, of course, a very broad remit, but all of this falls under the heading of what I mean by classics. So then, how about digital humanities? You've already had a good introduction to this question from Gabby, so I'll just gesture to a few of the most salient points. On a very basic level, digital humanities is any intersection of the humanistic, which is itself obviously a very broad idea, and the digital. So to give a few slightly more concrete ideas, and also I would just point that on the right, what we have is a few different screenshots from the website that really does exist, whatisdigitalhumanities.com. So you can go there and, as Gabby said, find many, 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 many different perspectives on what digital humanities is from practitioners of digital humanities. So as I said, to give a few more concrete ideas, DH can include things like making texts and images machine readable or transforming them in ways that can make them analyzable as data. It can be studying how humans interact with the digital, so almost more of a social science in some ways. It can be creating or using digital tools to work in non-traditional ways with the traditional subjects of a humanities discipline. And it can be doing things like creating 3D models of cultural heritage sites and objects. And obviously, this is just a very small subset of possible examples. So let's turn to digital classics specifically. The traditionally recognized beginning of digital humanities and the beginning of digital classics are, I would say, one and the same. And the reason for this is in the mid-1940s, a Jesuit priest named Roberto Bussa conceived of a plan to produce a concordance of all the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas. Now, a concordance, if you're unfamiliar with the term, is basically an alphabetized list of all the words used in a text, which is a common and very handy tool for anyone who's working seriously with a text. Now, Thomas Aquinas was a very prolific writer, and so this concordance that Bussa planned was a massive, massive undertaking. And Bussa decided to try and use the very newly invented IBM computers to undertake this project in order to make it more feasible. And as a proof of concept, he started with just 4 Latin poems that Aquinas had written. So this project is traditionally seen as the birth of digital humanities, although there are, in fact, other plausible starting points to the narrative, other feasible beginnings of the field that would one day be known as digital humanities. And in any case, given that Aquinas wrote in Latin, the birth of digital humanities can also be seen as the birth of digital classics specifically, as well as digital theology and digital philosophy. So if we look at a timeline of digital humanities and digital classics, they start in the same place, with the Index Thomisticus project of Roberto Bussa. Within just a few years of Bussa's first publication on the project, we find both general digital humanities projects and more strictly classics-focused projects taking off. And I should note that at this point in time, digital humanities was actually called humanities computing. So that's what you'll see it referred to if you're looking at publications from or about this period. The flagship journal of digital humanities was called Computers and the Humanities, and it was launched in 1966. And so that should give you an idea of just how much scholarly interest there already was at this point in time. You need a lot of interest to actually start a journal. Now, the year before Computers and the Humanities was launched, a journal specifically devoted to studying ancient languages with computers also comes into existence. And it's not limited to Greek and Latin, but they do predominate. And the center that produces the journal, which still exists, is primarily focused on Greek and Latin. So at this early stage, texts are definitely the primary focus of both digital classics and, in fact, all early humanities computing, creating machine-readable texts and performing all sorts of studies on them. But it's also important to stress that classics is not and has never just been about texts, even though texts are a critical and predominant source of evidence. So we should also recognize the various ways in which things other than text made their way into the digital realm, even in this extremely early period. For instance, there were some databases of objects being created. Just as one example, we have this record from 1967 that a couple of scholars were trying to create a database of Minoan and Mycenaean seal stones. And they don't actually know if that particular project ever really took off, but a modern database does exist now of exactly that topic. So the first, and in many ways, still the most significant major project of digital classics was begun in 1971. The Thesaurus Linguae Graecae, which is generally referred to as the TLG, is an attempt to make machine-readable versions of the entirety of all texts ever written in ancient Greek. And the man who developed it was named Ted Brunner. As I mentioned, I'm going to be giving you the names of some pivotal figures in the progression of digital classics as we go through. Now, Brunner wasn't the one who came up with the idea. That credit goes to a woman named Marianne MacDonald. She was a graduate student at the time at the University of Irvine, the University of California, Irvine. And she just happened to also be independently vastly wealthy because she was the heir to the Zenith Corporation. So she started off the project with a donation of $1 million, which, remember, this was 1971. So the TLG was created with the singular goal of making the complete corpus of ancient Greek texts both available and searchable. Its initial inspiration was MacDonald's desire to be able to search for every single appearance of all the words meaning happiness. That was part of the focus of her dissertation. But the existence of the TLG fundamentally transformed research in the field of classics, and I really can't stress that enough. The other really important person here is David Packard, who was a classicist who was also the son of one of the founders of Hewlett-Packard. So he modified one of the original HP computers to work with the TLG texts, and in order to do so, he built a new computer system that was called Ibycus, after a Greek poet. And it's this system that made the TLG accessible to the also the wild world, but the wider world of classicists. And so I think it's also interesting to note that classics computing was basically supercharged by the humanities-inclined heirs of major technological figures. And some of this trickled over into other disciplines as well that also benefited from the TLG and from Ibycus. Essentially, what we can see is that money and security allow for leisured innovation. McDonald's $1 million enabled Brunner to have the initial resources to start the TLG at the scale it actually needed for its ambition. And Packard basically didn't need to worry about whether or not he got tenure, so he could afford to go full sail down the very precarious and then even more precarious path of humanities computing. So in any case, coming back to the project itself, this is more or less what the original raw encoded TLG text looks like, or at least what it looked like by 1999, which is not vastly different from what it originally would have looked like. Here is what the text produces on a modern computer with a modern program to interpret it. And then here's the TLG website today showing the results of a proximity search for 2 strings of text from the first line of Homer's Odyssey that has also found other co-occurrences, say from Sappho. So we can see that it really very much works as planned. And so I'm going to include in this timeline a handful of landmark projects that I'm not going to actually talk about today, such as the Duke Databank of Documentary Papyri. And so we'll upload the PowerPoint slides later, and you'll find some information and links in the PowerPoint notes if you want to find out more information about them. So our next major project is the Perseus project, which all of you have almost undoubtedly encountered at some point or other, or maybe used frequently, depending. And it has, from the beginning, had an incredibly large and far-reaching vision. In a nutshell, it's a hypermedia environment for teaching and research, linked texts and images and tools. And today, that seems perfectly run-of-the-mill. But its first incarnation was produced before the web existed at all. Instead, it was developed using Macintosh HyperCard, but also before there was actually a public release of HyperCard. So as you see, the Perseus project starts in '85. HyperCard is released to the public in 1987. And the main person to know in connection with Perseus is Greg Crane, although many other people have been incredibly instrumental in its development over the years. And fortunately, Perseus is really very good about documenting them all, which is not necessarily the norm for all digital humanities projects. And so you can find the names of everybody who's ever worked on it on the Perseus website. Here's a timeline of the Perseus project, which now technically is the Perseus Digital Library from their website. And so it may seem on the surface of things that the Perseus project and the TLG are somewhat similar in terms of both providing computerized Greek text. In fact, they are worlds apart. Perseus is designed primarily for those learning about or even interested in the ancient world, and it wasn't ever just about text. It's meant to be an exploratory tool as well as an information-seeking tool. As it originally described itself, the quote here, it's a single heterogeneous database with many kinds of evidence about a particular culture in a structure that allows readers to move as easily as possible from one kind of information to another. And as the first large-scale hypermedia project, it shaped what came after it outside of the classics field as well as inside. There were many, many people watching this project and seeing how it developed and what it did and what its impacts were or could be. Additionally, it has very much gone in the opposite direction of the TLG in terms of accessibility. The TLG today is paywalled, meaning that scholars can only access it if their university pays to have a subscription. And even then, it may be restricted to 1 or 2 fixed IP addresses on the university's actual campus. Conversely, Perseus's texts and tools are freely available and have provided the foundation for many subsequent projects that built on top of them. So the circled portions of this timeline on the left are the points where where we can basically see them moving very proactively even further on in the direction of openness and accessibility. So here is the first preserved online version of Perseus from late 1996, just a couple of years after it first showed up on the web. And then here's the site as it is today. Some remarkable similarities, some very clear differences. So our next major project takes us away from the textual and to the purely visual. Virtual Rome, which today is called Rome Reborn, was the first navigable 3D reconstruction of the ancient world that was produced by scholars. So each part of that sentence is important. I should note that it was not the first scholarly 3D reconstruction of Greco-Roman antiquity at all. The very first static scholarly 3D reconstruction, and in fact the earliest known 3D archaeological reconstruction at all, dates all the way back to the mid-1980s. You can see that snuck into the timeline there some reconstructions of Roman Bath and the Caerleon Roman fort in Wales from the early to mid-80s. And you'll also notice that several other important events have occurred in the interim on both sides of the timeline, such as a BitNet group, which was the precursor to mailing lists, basically. So again, many people have been involved with Rome Reborn over the years, but the main name to know here is Bernie Fischer, who has become a very major figure in digital heritage reconstruction. If you haven't encountered his name yet, you undoubtedly will at some point. And so Rome Reborn came to widespread public notice over a decade after it started in 2008, when it was integrated as a layer in Google Earth. The graphics at this point were, as you can see, still somewhat rudimentary, but also sort of very remarkable for what was available to the just general public at the time. So next we come to the STOA Consortium, which is really an umbrella for open and collaborative digital classics projects. And it was founded by the late Ross Scaife. And Ross Scaife was a great proponent of open access and open data before he passed away in 2008. And he was really very instrumental in shaping that aspect of digital classics for the future. And this is sort of a theme that we'll come back to in this timeline, and then also that you'll come back to time and again this semester. So the STOA's first major initiative was the SUDA Online. And this was a crowdsourced collaborative editing project to translate into English the entirety of a major and massive 10th century encyclopedia called the SUDA, which was written in ancient Greek. And this encyclopedia is a key source of information about many, many aspects of the ancient world. It took 17 years for the SUDA Online to get to an initial state of completion, which may give you a sense of the project scope. But beyond its size, what makes it such a significant project? And that is because it's essentially utilizing wiki-like principles, but 3 years before Wikipedia existed. It's not, we can see on the timeline that the wiki concept dates back to 1995, so 3 years earlier. But Wikipedia, which is sort of what, again, made the wiki concept more public, was still a number of years in the future. And also, in addition to that, this SUDA Online is a valuable early model for collaborative, peer-reviewed digital publication, which is a really critical question that periodically surfaces in regard to digital projects. So I'll point in passing to two incredibly important projects that I've just put on the timeline sort of in retrospect. On the left side, back up in 1987 again, we have the Text Encoding Initiative, or TEI. And 12 years later, on the right side, the particular specification of the TEI, Epidoc, that was developed for epigraphy. So related now to digital heritage again. So now we come to 2004, which is the year that is traditionally seen as really launching digital humanities as a field of its own, with the publication of the first edition of the Blackwell Companion to Digital Humanities. It is at this point now also in a second edition. Ironically, Greg Crane's chapter on digital classics in that book, which I believe was one of the readings for today's session, is called An End of the History. And given the very compact length of this timeline, that may not seem surprising. It's been quite a history already. But what Crane is actually arguing here is that by 2004, we've reached a point where classics needs to stop going its own way and stop trying to build its own infrastructure and start collaborating more with other fields and start relying more on tools and infrastructure produced for other fields, including the sciences. And he calls this approach a convergence of needs. And this is, in general terms, an important ethos for the discipline of digital classics. And you'll see it reflected here and there in publications and online discussions. And it's not so different either from a perennial question that has dogged digital classics from the beginning, a question of sort of reinventing the wheel, sort of at what point do we need to go over and do all of this again, or at what point can we build on what other people have done and not sort of waste time starting something over when we could theoretically build on something else. And that also comes back to that question of open source, open data, and also, of course, using existing frameworks, existing infrastructure. So to return to our timeline, 2004 is also significant for one other reason, and this is the year that the digital classicist community was founded by somebody whose name will be familiar, which is Gabby Bodard. So digital classicist very quickly became the central website, discussion list, and online academic community for the majority of digital classics projects. There are, as you will know, regular seminars, workshops, and even publications under its aegis, including, of course, today's session of SunoikisisDC. But due, I think, very much to this coincidence of events in 2004, Crane's rallying cry for not seeing digital classics as a unique beast with unique needs, and the consolidating effect of the digital classicist community, as well as sort of external major socio-technological developments outside of digital humanities that actually started at around the same point, we really can see the 1950s through 2004 as a prolonged foundational era, and then what comes after 2004 as something of a new era, which is why this is the end of our sort of history timeline. So I am done with the slideshow. I don't know how to exit. There we go. Gabby can exit it for me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Darcy. That's a very very thorough and useful history of that period. Actually includes all sorts of things that I will shamelessly steal when I talk about this sort of thing in the future. Thank you. Great. Okay, let's move straight on to Polly, who's going to talk a little bit about computational linguistics, and particularly, but not necessarily only, classical computational linguistics, right?
Right. In fact, it's going to be a little bit of a detour now in the broader context of digital humanities, but also not so much, because I'll try in the next 5 minutes to convince you that every person who wants to do digital classics needs a little bit of linguistics, and I'll tie it just a little bit with classics, because I've tried to keep this very short and very broad at the same time, and these two concepts don't go well together. But anyways, what is computational linguistics? If you look for a one-sentence definition of that, you would see a lot of things on the internet, but I found this one and I liked it the most because I think it compacts the most information. This is the study of human language as structured data using computational methods. So the emphasis here is that this is human language within which we are looking for structures. It's treated as something that has internal organization and regularities, and we look to analyze those systematically across many examples. And the motivation to use computer for that is that this makes patterns visible that otherwise would be really hard to see if you're working with individual texts and trying to retain all of that in your mind at the same time. So we can combine some of the more traditionally philological methods that classicists are more comfortable with the power and possibilities given to us by computers. And it helps to situate computational linguistics relative to other closely related fields. in order to understand exactly what it does and what it doesn't. So if we think about theoretical linguistics, the first thing that comes to mind is that it focuses strongly on abstract models and linguistic knowledge. And in order to do that, it requires small, often constructed examples. It doesn't deal well with variation and variability. Computational linguistics focuses rather on pattern discovery in large data sets. So even if we approach this, and we do approach this in practice with a theoretical background, it is not us trying to make the data fit the model, but rather trying to see whether the model fits the data. And it is done on a tested language use, therefore it is much influenced by what the results are, and often the methods that are employed need to evolve as discoveries are being made on the corpus, as I'll show you in a bit. And how it is not, or rather not only, natural language processing. In NLP, the goal, we could say, is very much application-driven. The goal is building functional systems. So linguistic theory, while it helps, it is not in the basis of that. It's optional. The goal of NLP is, in the end, especially in commercial cases, to help with search, translation, and AI assistance, while we think of computational linguistics as being research-driven. And so even if NLP is used in it, its goal is to use. And yes, as I mentioned, you can't really do computational linguistics without theoretical linguistics. So things are linked together in this ecosystem, and the lines are blurred and non-existent oftentimes. And I'm going to give you some examples about methods that are used in computational linguistics very briefly. And if you have any questions about any of those, you could ask me. I'm not sure if I could answer, though, because I do a very particular flavor of computational linguistics, but we can all try to answer together. So a lot of what is done in computational linguistics is corpus-based methods. And corpora are basically these large collections of texts, which is something that is very difficult to keep in your human mind at all times. And what you can do with those is frequency analysis of certain words, collocations, some keywords can be found, and research like that, like the happiness research that McDonald was so interested in. She used a corpus-based computational linguistic method with that. Then the thing that me over here is doing is linguistic annotation in its form of tree banking, which requires some sort of work to be put in the corpus if you want to then retrieve useful information from it. So you can do part-of-speech tagging, parsing of tokens, named entities, and the goal of that is to make structures explicit and searchable so that you can then focus on them and make interesting conclusions based off them. You could also be building semantic models and do really cool things with distributional models of meaning. This is something that people do with ancient texts as well, and have shown in other SunoikisIS semesters. And you can track similarity and semantic change through a diachronic corpus, which of course in classics is a cool thing to do, having such a long textual tradition. Statistical modeling and machine learning are things that are also aiding in corpus linguistics. Particularly classification and clustering is something that really helps with authorship and attribution, and helps with fragments that are often floating without much context. So in this sense, computer-based methods help find similarities that otherwise might evade us. And since I already got this question from Gabby when we were discussing this session, and I couldn't quite answer from the top of my mind what is the difference between supervised and non-supervised, because to me everything felt supervised if you're putting so much into the quality of your corpus as effort. That all felt supervised to me, but a good rule of thumb that we can use for that is that when you have supervised methods, you actually tell the model what to look for. You set the rules of what you want to find. And then you could ask questions of the sort, like which features predict the given categories. And if you have unsupervised methods, you actually want to see what the model found and try to categorize it, classify it somehow. And you're looking for some latent structure, some regularities in the data that you might not have observed yourself. And finally, because I already think I went over my 5 minutes, just some examples of things that we can learn from linguistics and particularly computational linguistics that are not grammar and phonetics and purely linguistic things. So a really cool subsection of linguistics is psycholinguistics that deals with attention and cognitive load and perspective and distance and all sort of amazing neuroscience-related things. And social linguistics is something that in classics we do a lot of. I do a lot of that as well in my personal research, which I forgot to tell you anything about when I forgot to introduce myself. So that can be reserved for the end. But anyways, it is really useful when we study differences between literary and documentary texts, standard and non-standard language, and the very process of standardization in written Greek. Then we have historical linguistics, which of course is foundational for classics, because it makes possible to track long-term linguistic change systematically and quantify things that you can observe qualitatively, of course, but then if you have the numbers to back your observations, that gives them quite a different weight when you talk about them. And my point that I want to make here is that language data can serve not just for linguistic purposes, but as empirical evidence for questions that go far beyond language itself, like cognition, like culture and society. And especially in periods like the periods that classics concerns itself with, where other kinds of evidence are limited, we can learn a lot from language like that. And we have, through computational linguistics, a method of connecting these close philological, typical for classics, analysis with large-scale patterns, which I think is pretty cool. And what I do in the University of Helsinki, where I am now finishing my doctoral research, is to study word order and word order variation in linguistic, in documentary papyri from Egypt, from a very broad period. So I really need computational linguistics to aid me with that, with these very fragmentary texts that are otherwise very difficult to study. And with that, I conclude my not 5 minute long presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Polly. That was fantastic. I mean, I actually, we talked about this before, as you say, that I've learned a lot from this. This is really useful. Thank you.
Good to hear. Thank you.
Great. So our next case study on the question of what is digital classics is Monica, who's going to talk about the SunoikisIS program and the way we've been defining digital classics for the last, 12 years now, we've decided?
Yes, exactly. So I will say a few words about the program and also the name SunoikisIS, because last year in 2025, we celebrated our anniversary because the program officially started in 2015. And I have to say that the program started because Gregory Crane and I decided to start this program for digital classics, and why. At the time, Greg Crane was the Alexander von Humboldt professor here in Leipzig, and the idea was to follow a model, the original Sunoikisis program, which started in the 80s of last century, I have to say, thanks to an initiative of the Harvard Center for Hellenic Studies in Washington, D.C. At the time, so really in the 80s of last century, the technology was different, but the idea was to combine forces of different institutions joining, or at least organizing this program for classical studies. And of course, the technology was different, using still the telephone, for allowing students, especially from, let's say, colleges and the universities in remote places, I have to say in the United States, to join a big program for classics, and also allowing different people, professors, to teach in a combined course. And so we decided to follow this model, and the name Sunoikisis, this ancient Greek word, so this alliance, really. We decided to follow this model and to, let's say, to create a program for digital classics. So this is where we started, and officially we had this idea, and we had a first meeting in Chicago, at the former APA meeting, but at the time it was already called the Society for Classical Studies. And considering our expertise, because we, in general, also in this community, we mainly work with ancient Greek and Latin, we started with ancient Greek and Latin sources, but in general, in the program, in Sunoikisis, of course, we are open to other languages, other historical languages. And I'm mentioning this because it's interesting that the idea also, or at least the first meeting, was at the APA meeting, and there was a discussion about the change between from American Philological Association to Society for Classical Studies, because classical is not just about ancient Greek and Latin, and this is something that we have been discussing also in Sunoikisis in these 10 years. And so, as far as we can, we try to invite colleagues and students working also on other historical languages, other Mediterranean languages. And I would like to thank here also other people, not only Gregory Crane, but also Gregory Nash, Kenny Morrell, because I went also to the CHS to learn a bit about this program, and they helped at the beginning. And I have to say that we are still here because I started the program, but many people joined the program, and first of all, Gabriel Bodard, and we are here because we are now a community, not only in Europe, but also in other countries. We have people organizing these semesters, and so this was a dream at the beginning, I have to say, which was possible also because at the time we began to have in Europe the first academic positions, even if with many difficulties, I have to say, the first academic positions in Europe for, let's say, digital classics. And so we had funds, so we could start the program. But now the program is still here because we have people, we have volunteers, and we are running the program. And speaking of, well, digital classics, in this session, we have heard different definitions of digital classics and digital humanities, but the idea was, and still is, to, let's say, to foster the critical use of methods, but also a critical analysis of data. And this is what we have been always doing in classics in general. We work with data. We work with data in a printed format. We're working with data in a digital format. And I think that classicists are well equipped in this sense because our sources have already experienced many technological revolutions since the past, from orality to writing, to inscriptions, papyri, the printed age, the digital world today, and tomorrow, something else. So in this sense, I think that our sources survived in some way through these technological revolutions. And today we're experiencing the digital. So we are still going on to critically study and evaluate and understand our sources. So this was the original goal of the program, and this is what is happening. In terms of, let's say, technologies, we started with, at the time, 10 years ago, we were using Google Hangouts for our online meetings, and then we decided to use GitHub for collecting slides, for collecting class outlines. You know that because we already have, we still have, sorry, our pages. I would also like to mention two, let's say, resources that you can use, because in the, I'm pasting the link to the page in our chat. So in our GitHub main page, we also have two links to a Google spreadsheet where we have a list of the sessions of each sessions. We still need to add the sessions of the few last semesters, but we have a list which is useful. So basically, a spreadsheet, you can search sessions and by topics, by let's say presenters, etc. And we also have in this main page a link to a Zotero group. And I have to say that both the Google spreadsheet and the Zotero group were, let's say, started by students here in Leipzig, and I have to thank them because they did really a great job. So we have a Zotero group, a library, you can join it and you can add more bibliographic resources. Now we have more than 600 items arranged by Sunoikis semesters. And I would like also to mention one thing, because before Darcy mentioned the paper by Gregory Crane on classics and the computer and end of the history. It was 2004, and that title is interesting because I remember, well, a few years after that, I also remember still discussions, because many people said, well, we're now in a post-PC world, and we have students living, they are a post-PC generation, so we have to understand that. So we are still definitely in a post-PC world, and well, not only internet, but many other things are allowing us to really have these, let's say, post-PC possibilities. And we also talk about the global, let's say, philology, global classics. This is something that is happened. And of course, now with the artificial intelligence, we're entering another. So just to understand an end of the history in this sense, this is my comment for the title of that paper, which is an important paper. So these, these are just a few notes about the program. And in these 10 years, we have been trying to, well, not just to find new definitions of the digital humanities and digital classics, we always need them, but really to concretely work with methods and data. So to concretely work with problems. How can we analyze our data? How can we represent our sources, our artifacts in a digital environment? So concrete problems, concrete issues that we have. And of course, we also have not only different languages in our program, but also sub-disciplines: history, historiography, philology, archaeology, papyrology, and so on. So there are really many, let's say, disciplines within classics represented in this program. And at the beginning, we had, let's say, Sunoikis' digital classics program with sessions on various topics. Now we have different terms with a focus on, for example, this one, the cultural heritage. Then, for example, next semester, the summer semester corresponding to the German summer semester, we will have sessions on digital scholarly editions. So we are following, we are also trying to let's say, organize our syllabi and also our programs following mainly, let's say, these how can I say, not the disciplines, but really these ideas to focus a bit more on artifacts or on, let's say, philology, scholarly editions, and then we have a lot on linguistics. This is another thing that we have seen in these 10 years. So the strict connection between linguistics, for example, and philology, the analysis of text, and then, of course, with computational linguistics, now we have many projects working with this text and with data. I don't know if I have to add other things. Of course, I could go on forever, but now I think I will stop. Just to say also that I'm very happy to see now in the program as co-organizers young scholars. They began as students of Sunoikisis, we can say that, with Gabby, and now they are co-organizing our programs, and I have to thank all of them because the program is still here, thanks to all of us and thanks to them. And in fact, now we have this, let's say, spring semester, and next semester will be mainly organized by Martina Filosa from the University of Köln. She just got her PhD in Byzantine Studies, and we are organizing together this term on digital scholarly editions in classics, Byzantine and medieval studies. And another thing, the difficulty at the beginning was, given that we had this dream really to have students all around the world, and it was the case, the problem was to the calendar, because of course in different, not only continents, but also in different cities in the same country in Europe, we have different academic calendars. And so we tried to arrange that. And this is also why now we still have two semesters. One is the spring semester, more or less corresponding to the UK calendar, and then we have the summer semester, more or less corresponding to the German Central European academic calendar. But still, given that, so we go live every week, but we have video recordings and we have slides, so it's possible to follow Sunoikisis every time you want. So that's it, and definitely I think that it was more than 10 minutes, and I think that now we can move on with Chiara.
I was actually just going to add one very, very small thing to what you said about this program. One other nice thing about the program, in addition to all the things you've just talked about, is the fact that, so you and I, Monica, I think are possibly unusual in that we use Sunoikisis live every week with our students, with our class. One thing that a lot of other people do, because all of the 150 sessions from the last 10 years or so are still online on YouTube, is they can say, okay, I really like this session from 2018, and I like this session from 2023, and I like these two sessions, and they can construct their own semester worth of syllabus for it. Or they can just use one or two individual sessions as sort of further materials, or various other ways of managing this. And other people use it not necessarily to teach students, but to learn. I certainly know of people who have used Sunoikisis as their sort of introduction to a particular topic, which, they, within a year or two, they were teaching it on Sunoikisis, but also becoming experts on in various other ways. So it's being used in lots of different ways, as well as the way that we're using it today. For most of the people watching, I suspect, are following it in one class or another. But also by lots of other people. So it's very cool.
And yes, one thing that I didn't mention about the model, the original Sunoikisis, this was the model. So basically to have two classes per week, one together remotely, also in the 80s of last century, with other universities, other students, and other colleagues to discuss together one session. And then the other class in the week is locally in your institution to work with your students on the topics of the, let's say, online session. And this was also the model, and we are running still that in Leipzig and in the UK, in the sense that we have online classes. Now it's easier, of course. This is an example where we are a group of instructors coming from different places discussing specific topics, and then then in class we can help our students to introduce them to the program, to a specific topic, and then we discuss with them specific questions. So, and these, of course, if there are people there listening to us, if you're interested in this, so you can organize locally your Sunoikisis program. So we offer these online sessions, a lot of material, and then you can run the program locally following your, let's say, institutional requirements, and have local classes. And this is what is going to happen next semester with Martina Filosa, who is officially organizing a Sunoikisis course in Köln, the University of Cologne, for digital classics. Otherwise, we have you can use our material in your classes, just one session, an entire semester. We have slides, and of course we ask you to give us feedback if you're going to do that, comments, etc. So just, I mean, to see that you're using the program and that it's helpful. Yeah, but that's it.
Okay, I believe it's my turn. All right, so let me see if I can share my screen very quickly. Perfect, thanks, Gabi. Okay, hello everybody. My name is Chiara Palladino. I will be the co-organizer of this term of the Sunoikisis Digital Cultural Heritage, together with Gabi. And I am currently assistant professor in digital humanities and the ancient world at the University of Durham, which, given the discussion that we've had at the beginning, is a particularly problematic title. And therefore, they gave me an even more problematic subtitle, which is a specialist in Greek literature, which doesn't necessarily describe what I do, but we sort of needed to limit the amount of controversy that this title would bring with it. My interest is mostly in the application of digital methods to the intersection of materiality and space and place, with a good eye to spatial narratives, but also histories of reception and translation and so on. And my favorite languages, that is the languages that I'm currently competent on, are Latin and Greek. But of course, I am with Gabi in considering classics as something that goes beyond the Greco-Mediterranean, the Greco-Roman Mediterranean world. So I will spend a couple of minutes just introducing probably the other very, very important resource that anybody approaching the domain of digital classics should know, and that is the Digital Classicist Wiki. I've posted the link in the chat, in the comments, and you can see the main page, the landing page over here. So the Digital Classicist Wiki was born as a collaborative and crowdsourced catalog of resources and tools and methods relevant to classicists and to anybody who was interested in applying computational and digital methods to the study of antiquity. It was born as a resource from the Digital Classicist Hub, the group that, as Darcy said, was born out of the initiative of Gabi and other scholars. And it is at this moment, I think, probably the biggest catalog of projects and tools within the specific domain of digital classics and its relative subfields. So what does the Digital Classicist Wiki do, and what can you do with it? It's basically a giant list of pages, curated pages around resources for digital classics. It is a collaborative and crowdsourced initiative. So basically, it implements the principle that we see in Wikipedia, for example. There is an editorial board that manages the publication and reviews the changes to the pages, but there's also a very large number of volunteer contributors who provide, support, provide new pages, or keep those pages updated as well, or corrected. And these are a community of different people. There's, people who are actually responsible or developers of certain projects, research PIs, and so on, but also academics, students, teachers, curators of data, of resources, practitioners in cultural heritage, in museums, and so on, but also users, people who have been experimenting with these tools, projects, and methods for their own research or for their own teaching. So people who can claim to know these projects. So it's really a community of, it's really a relatively diverse community that is in some ways representative of the various subfields, the backgrounds that, create this composite environment of digital classics. At the same time, of course, it's also inevitably self-selective. And so in the exercise that you have for today's session, you're invited to look around the digital classicists and see the sort of inherent biases, or where the most frequent edits are coming from, what are the most updated, the most extensive pages, and so on, and what that can tell you about the state of the situation here. Also, the Digital Classicist Wiki holds regular editing events, and it is always open to new contributors and new volunteers. Typically, these events are around special subfields of special subprojects. There are also available tutorials. There are also in the page for people who are interested in contributing. And internally, there is also a running wish list of pages that need updating, or pages that need to be added. So how to use the Digital Classicist Wiki? The most important set of resources is probably here. You can see that there is an essential distinction between projects and tools, which admittedly is a convention, like every distinction of names. But basically the idea is that projects are actual research initiatives that that try to use digital methods for some sort of research question, or that are applied to research in ancient history, classics, or antiquity. Whereas the tools are better explained in terms of methods, methodologies, and resources. So the types of things that you can use and apply potentially to other things, to other research questions, to other data creation processes, to other computational applications, to new corpora, and so on and so forth. So these contain, for example, things like GIS, or tools for OCR, or dictionaries, or lexica, and so on and so forth. So there are also, as you might see under navigation here, the categories, which are essentially tags, I would say, that you will be able to see at the bottom of each page, that essentially categorize each resource and each page according to the most likely topics of interest that it is going to address. So how do you search the Digital Classicist Wiki? You probably have already an idea. You go up here and you search for the type of things, the type of keywords that you want. So next week, we're going to have a session on collaborative geodata, which is going to focus on partly spatial analysis and GIS, and partly a few different projects. One of them is the IDEA, International Dura Europos. So we can check it out and see if we can find it in Digital Classicist Wiki. And here it is. This is the page. As you can see, there's a pretty strong, structural description into each page. There's a title and there's a content with the list of the PIs, or the responsibles for a specific project, a description, and then a set of other resources, which can also be bibliographical as well. And you can see the categories as well here. Other things that you might search for are not so specific. For instance, if you're interested in a method like GIS, for example, you can search for GIS and you can get a general idea of what defines the method, how can it be applied, software that is available, tools that are available, and training initiatives for a particular method. So this is really what the Digital Classicist Wiki is, and it's a really, really, really useful resource for anybody, not just for anybody who is, taking their first steps, but I would say even for people who have been in this field for quite some time, because there's always something to learn and there are always new projects. If you're doing a literature review, if you're looking for resources about a specific thing or topic or theme, it is always a resource worth going back to. At the same time, of course, it is not exhaustive, obviously, because that would never be the case. It cannot cover every single thing that we mean when we talk about digital classics, and this is the reason why it is collaborative and crowdsourced, so that hopefully we can gather as many as possible of those interpretations and definitions and multiple visions of what the discipline is. I think I'll stop talking now, and we can perhaps go back to the discussion. Is there anything else that we need to cover?
Don't think so. I think that's a very good introduction to the wiki and to the sorts of information one can get out of it. So yeah, I think that's great. I think we're and I'm fully aware that I set the precedent for this by speaking for longer than I said I would, and everybody dutifully followed that precedent. So we're slightly closer to the end of our time than we normally would be. We hoped to have about half an hour for discussion. At the end, we've got about 10 minutes, but that's fine. So I would start by inviting those people watching live. Please do leave comments, ask questions, and so forth, and we'll respond to them if we can. But in the meantime, while we're waiting, do any of us have questions for each other, as it were, or comments or additions?
I mean, one question that I get asked quite often by people who are not within the field is, how did you get into digital classics in the first place? If anybody wants to volunteer, I've told the story plenty, so I think people know about it. But if anybody else wants to volunteer and tell their story, I think it would be interesting.
My answer reveals my age somewhat, because I was finishing my undergraduate degree in the same year that the World Wide Web, in its current HTTP form, came to everybody's awareness, and so I thought, this looks really cool. I'd like to know how to make one of these web pages. So I learned HTML and started making web pages. At the same time, the classics department that I then signed up to do a PhD in that year decided they wanted a web page. So I made it for them, and I became known as that classics kid who knows how to write pages for the web. And I got my first job on the strength of that, and ended up doing postdocs in digital classics, which really feels sort of by accident in many ways.
I can yes, again, speaking of the old generation, but I can say that I still remember the TLG in Perseus on CD-ROMs. But the thing that and Darcy mentioned that, so Perseus is a multimedia project. I was very young. It was fantastic to have in the same environment a book, a map, a dictionary, a handbook of ancient history. Really, it was fantastic. And then the concept of the hypertext. I think that being older than other people, I can really enjoy this concept, because I could see really the hypertext, not just as a technology, but really as a concept. So the text is broken and we have this hypertext. So, and we can really understand hyperlinks, links. And today that we have linked open data, we can really understand that. And I was lucky enough to see this, and this is something that fascinated me. And then step by step, I was interested in that, and then I was lucky also to follow in this interest, and then to find also opportunities, even if in a nomadic life, I have to say, to follow this interest. Of course, the world was a bit different, but this is where I started. And then, yes, the technology has changed, but we still have these projects, and many concepts are still there. This is another interesting thing. So yes, of course, Father Busa started in the 40s of last century, but even if the technologies run fast, we still have main concepts and problems, even if we have new programming languages. Now that we have the artificial intelligence, still methods and basic methods and general principles are still there, and we can work on them. So in fact, the digital classics, digital humanities, whatever, is not just about learning the last, format or the last programming language, but to understand the method in general when we annotate a text and when we want, and also is not only about the openness is not only about getting a resource for free or not, but how we structure data. So in this sense, we still have methods and questions that I think would be valid for many years to come, even if the technology is running quite fast. I think this is my opinion, at least. But how about younger people in the room?
I'm not actually that much younger than Gabby, a few years, but I suppose my active interaction with digital classics is younger, so I guess I could speak from that perspective. Much like I was in high school when the World Wide Web began, but similarly, was sort of in an online environment, making web pages and so forth, and then kind of lurked in the digital classics realm for a good couple of decades, and watched developments and sort of kept, obviously I used Perseus when I was in high school, learning Greek and so forth. And then a few years ago, I, for a number of reasons, but I went back to school to do a master's in data analytics and visualization, and had the opportunity in the context of that to do an advanced certificate in digital humanities. So sort of the combination of those enabled me to actually sort of set foot into the digital classics world, as opposed to just watching it and making use of it. I think also sort of the particular interests in wanting to do a few specific projects, and then just more generally thinking that it's useful knowledge, useful ways to sort of stretch one's disciplinary boundaries or sidestep into a new world. I hadn't previously worked pretty much at all with GIS, but now it's something that I definitely am thinking about. And so it's sort of one finds intersections with whatever one is interested in, I think, and so you can take it as its own world, and I could do one thing in my sort of traditional classics and then a separate thing in my digital classics side, or I can find points of intersection, and I think both are interesting. And then of course also I have a general interest in the history of digital classics, as may be evident from my presentation earlier. So I think all of those are sort of different points of entry and interest for me.
Yes, and I think that when we began to see institutional programs for digital humanities and digital classics, many things changed, because when we started, there were no positions, there were no curricula. Still, the situation is quite difficult, we can say, but this is happening. So we have now many programs around the world, and we have positions finally, so we can really work with these methods. Yeah. Other thoughts?
There is a question in the chat that we might want to just quickly look at while we're here. So this is from one of the two Sarahs who said hi at the beginning. So I guess the focus of her work is on field archaeology, in particular in Roman North Africa. So things in that area, where might we go to look for things in that area? I'm not sure I know the answer to that question.
So what I did so you'll notice that there's a search bar at the top of the digital wiki page. So first I just tried searching for Morocco and got no results. But what I did that did find some potentially relevant results, and that would obviously be for you to decide how relevant they are. But first I just simply searched for the word site. Now, obviously we have website, etc. So it's not going to exclusively find things that are relevant to archaeological sites, but so at the top it will give you anything that has the word site in the title of the page, but after that it will give you everything that has the word site in the body of the page. So you can sort of use that to find various things talking about archaeological sites. And then I did a similar, I searched for the word Africa, right? And so that then finds anything that's talking about North Africa in the description of the project. So I'd say that, well, similarly, I have no personal knowledge about sort of any projects related to Morocco, Roman archaeology, etc. That would sort of be a way on the wiki to sort of filter through some things and start, finding some things that are potentially relevant. And often when one finds one thing, one can then find more things because you look at who's working on a particular project and go see what else they've worked on. Or sometimes if you go to one project, it might have connections with a different project somewhere on the page, or it will give you an idea of additional things you might search for on the web as well as on the Classics Wiki. So that's sort of one potential approach to finding relevant sites.
I can add one thing. It's also a good idea to think about what sort of methodology or subdisciplines you're operating into, right? So you can do an extensive geographical search, searching for Africa, for example, I think it's a very good idea. But it also depends on what you're interested in. Are you interested in archaeological research or museum or object data and things like that? And in that sense, the categories and the tools are quite useful to sort of branch out. They might not give you immediately the answer to what you're interested in, but they will give you a range of projects through which you can then specify your research. I'll say that one of the big things that are missing from the Digital Classics Wiki is precisely a map. And that's not a resource that we plan having anytime soon. But it's definitely one of the points, one of the aspects that are missing in the resource at the moment.
A good point, and I think we could ask the same question: how would we go about finding things on this subject area in SunoikisisDC, for example? Mm-hmm. And while there's not likely to be very much that is specifically focused on North Africa, for example, I mean, there will be occasional sessions that include North African sites or North African texts or whatever as part of the thing, especially quite a lot on Egypt, for example, although that's the wrong end of North Africa for the question. But in terms of the sorts of methodologies that are discussed, exactly as Chiara was saying, site remote sensing, sort of site recording, 3D imaging, photogrammetry, drone photography, those sorts of things do get talked about occasionally. And we've had sessions on those in Sunoikisis, and those are relevant to anyone who's looking at an archaeological site, wherever in the world that might be. And again, on the subject of a map, Sunoikisis does have a map. It's a map of institutions from which people who, to which people who contribute to Sunoikisis are affiliated, and it's a really nice map. And it's linked again on the Sunoikisis front page that Monica talked about earlier. But one could, in theory, I'm struggling to see how one could easily collate the data to do so. But technically, one could create a map saying, places talked about in Sunoikisis. That would be interesting to produce that and see what that looked like. But I can't imagine doing it immediately, but that's the sort of thing. And I suspect that if we did that, Morocco would not appear on that map currently. Egypt certainly would, Libya certainly would, other parts of North Africa would, potentially, but so it depends. I mean, in terms of geographical coverage or in terms of disciplinary coverage, methodological content, there's different ways to go about answering that question. Yeah.
Yes, I put the link to the map in our chat, so you can see the Google map that we started, and it shows, yes, the program. So how many, let's say, institutions are involved. in Europe, in the US, in Africa, in South America. So we have, yes, but of course we still miss many countries. But it's happening. So I think that so there are also, we have people from countries now experiencing in these days also difficulties, but and I have to thank those people because they are part of our community. So step by step, and definitely the technology helps us, even if there are places where it's not possible to be connected. It's not just about linked open data, it's really about the basics, so to have an internet connection. So we still have this problem somewhere.
It's worth saying that while I look at this map and I think this is amazing, the breadth of coverage we have, someone else might look at this map and say, well, there are some pretty huge blank spaces on this map, right? It's like, what we've got, Cairo and Johannesburg and nowhere else in Africa. We've got almost nowhere in Asia east of Tehran. We've got one in Australia, one in New Zealand. I mean, there's obvious gaps in this, and one could quite, reasonably criticize us for that, and we perfectly welcome that criticism and not argue with it, but it's that aside. I mean, if we just if we look at the coverage within Europe, which we are extremely pleased about, there's a really good coverage there, and not the Middle East, and therefore we've got from Helsinki in the north, Tehran off in the east, Egypt, as I say, down to Stellenbosch,
Stellenbosch, yes.
Yeah. So we've got pretty. It's pretty exciting to have that sort of coverage in a project like this. There's something like 140 institutions. Many of them are UK institutions. There are many Italian and German institutions, and then a sort of scattering in other places. But so it's an uneven distribution, but it's a very exciting sort of spread anyway.
Well, I have to say that this map shows, institutions. So those institutions of the program, in the sense that this map shows people who joined the program and who are joining the program also now. But the map doesn't show users, let's say. So because technically you can join Sunoikis everywhere, every time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure that we could have a map with more places, because I'm sure, I know that there are many people following the program in various countries. And of course, we always try, we are open. If there is a scholar or a person working with digital data, with interesting questions, we are open to invite him or her to the program and to organize events. Of course, we have limited resources, in the sense that we try to do what we can, but I'm sure that we have more people, and we also have interesting numbers in our YouTube channel. So I'm sure that the map we could add more places in the map. So of course, yes, we could do more.
This is a map of people who have taught on Sunoikis, right? Specifically,
yeah, exactly.
People. So it's we 5 are represented on this map. The dozen people who watched this live, and the 100 people who will watch it at some point in the next 2 weeks, and the 100 more people who will watch it in the next 6 months after that. I'm guessing based on previous numbers, and those people are not represented on this map because we don't actually know where each of them is from, right? I mean, that's not data we have, and even if we did, putting it into a map would be tricky. But yes, I mean, given what it is, I mean, I do think this is a brilliant map. I think we should celebrate all the things that this map does represent. I can think of ways to put dots, a few hundred kilometers further north than our northernmost thing on this map already. I've got in mind to call up someone and see if they want to join a conversation later this semester, specifically in that area. I'm not all that clear that I have a contact that I could think of to get someone, you know, much further south than the sort of Cairo area from elsewhere in mainland Africa. But we can, but we certainly should be, you know, getting more people represented among the teachers in these things. So you know, let's all sort of keep in mind to do that. You know, even within Europe, we've got obvious sort of clusters and biases there. We've got an interesting sort of East Coast bias in North America there, and you know, we have one extremely enthusiastic and energetic partner in Brazil, which who represents the whole of South America for us. So there's all sorts of ways in which we could, you know, we could expand it. You know, we have colleagues who we collaborate with on digital classics projects in Japan and in China and in other places. We've never had them teaching on Synoikis because we tend to run the Synoikis sessions at you know, what is, you know, early evening in Europe, midnight in China, 1 or 2 a.m. in Japan. I mean, that's a bit hard. I mean, my Japanese colleagues would all join at 1 a.m. if we invited them to, but I feel mean doing so. But you know,
well, I did that.
Right.
At the beginning, I did that for the US. I remember that, waking up at 1 a.m. So, I mean, of course, is this, but the time we tried to find, I mean, a time zone. But yes, of course, this is one of the challenges. This is why we need more people, and exactly. So again, for people listening to us, if you're interested, also because we look for new people, but it's not always easy to find new guests sometimes. So. Yeah. Still have 9 minutes according to my schedule. So I don't know if there are any other questions in the. Another good thing, of course, you can ask questions in the chat on YouTube. And technically, you can.
Yeah. To my club, we finished 9 minutes ago. It's the other way around. But that's.
Sorry. So so okay. This is, yes, it's true. Okay. No, it's true. It's my my Alexa, which is not really okay on time. So sorry for that. We're definitely over.
Yeah. No, this has been. And obviously we have a lot to cover because we're trying to sort of introduce the whole semester. Most of these sessions, the idea is that we will present for an hour, and then we have up to half an hour for discussion. But we don't expect to always use the full half an hour. So it won't always be 90-minute long sessions. Certainly won't always be 100-minute long session. But yeah, so maybe then we can, you know, obviously those people who are students of one of us here, you can ask us next week or whenever we next have a class. People who are not and would like to ask us a question, our names are on the screen. Googling us will almost certainly bring up an email address somewhere that you can contact us, or you contact whichever one of us you can find and say, you know, how do I find that other person's contact, and you know, we can help. So you know, we'd love to hear from people. Especially, I love getting emails that say, I was watching Synoikis the other day and I have a question. Those are brilliant. You know, you make new friends that way. You know, that's you know, literally you do. So thank you all again. Next week we have our session on, he says, scrolling to that screen, working with collaborative cultural heritage geographical data, which will be joined by Anne Chen, Sebastian Heath, and Emily Helm, who are all from various parts of the east coast of the US again. And we will very much look forward to that. So I hope to see many of you there. Thank you. Bye.